develop these properties.
That's correct.
So, without obtaining, under this proposed ordinance, 100% adjoining landowner consent, this can never be changed no matter what changes in history. And perpetuity is a long time. It's like forever.
It's forever. That's why the lines are red. There's no going in or out. There's no moving from that slot there.
So irrespective of any other conditions that might exist in economics, land use, or anything, or desires of people at South Point, this has been rendered permanently sterile as far as any other type of development goes.
That's correct. There used to be, under the old ordinance, available 58 potential uses. Now the only use forevermore in perpetuity, as you said, is the use outlined in red: community and private membership outdoor recreation facilities.
So with that review in mind, I'm going to ask you to go to page 6 of your report and testify that you have a number of paragraphs regarding your various conclusions about this proposed ordinance.
Sure. First off, we'll talk about the intent of the Special Development Zoning District. The intent's important because it informs the specific requirements that are found within that particular zoning district. And the intent here, as I talked about before, is for the Special Development Zoning District to facilitate development, to accommodate a variety of uses, provide a procedure which can respond to changes in market conditions, and allow flexibility in design. The freezing of this particular property at this particular land use is completely contrary to the very specific stated intent of the Special Development Zoning District. Additionally, I mentioned the ability to go down the rung to something that is less restrictive. It's not a real ability because you need approval of 100% of the property owners if your property is developed. But even with regard to that ability to move down the ladder, there isn't any explanation about the hows or whys, where the percentages came from, why the property owners are afforded particular authority in that approval process.
Have you ever seen any experience affording neighboring property owners approval authority of MPC regulated and ordinance-related land development in your entire district?
No. Okay, point number 2 would be that there's been a lot of talk tonight so far about the conditional use process. This proposed amendment isn't a proper use of the conditional use process. As I talked about earlier, there are permitted uses that are allowed in this district, and the municipality's planning code allows for those permitted uses to be categorized as a conditional use, a special exception, or a use by right. Conditional uses are afforded, the elected officials are afforded the ability to attach additional conditions in the ordinance specifically and during the hearing process. They can attach additional conditions to that use. But that process and those conditions relate to the specific use that is categorized as a conditional use. This whole requirement about moving up and down the ladder and approval of the adjacent property owners, that is couched in a section that is purported to be conditional use requirements. But they aren't conditional use requirements. They are, in effect, the approval or denial process for potential land uses on that property. And finally, on that point, there aren't, even though this isn't a typical or isn't an authorized use by the authorized process, to use the conditional use process via the municipality's planning code, there isn't any explanation as to how the elected officials, or for that matter, the property owners, are to evaluate a particular application for a use to move up or down the ladder. So there's no specificity, despite the fact that this proposed section of the ordinance introduces itself by saying that the following objective standards and criteria need to be followed. There's nothing objective or standard about what this section creates with respect to how potential land uses are treated in the special development district.
Next conclusion.
Number 3, this is a rezoning, an improper rezoning. The purpose of zoning or rezoning property is for the elected officials to identify, to authorize particular land uses that are permitted within properties within each zoning district as created by the municipality. This isn't a zoning amendment, though. This isn't a zoning map amendment. This is a text amendment to the zoning ordinance. And it's a pretty extreme one. This isn't a tweaking. This isn't a word change. This isn't a finesse. This is taking 58 previously available uses on a particular tract of land and changing those available uses from 58 to 1. That's a rezoning. And it's improper because the municipality's planning code specifically lays out a process for the rezoning of property, and that process has not been followed with respect to this proposed text amendment.
Did you also reach an opinion as to whether the proposed amendment constitutes spot zoning under Pennsylvania law?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, the golf course property is specifically pigeonholed at that top rung and no other use, no other land use is available. And the way that this ordinance is drafted, because that land use, the community or private membership outdoor recreation facilities land use, which is the use on the golf course property, because that's at the top of the list, there's no other use available, and there's no other property within the special development district to which that requirement would apply. In other words, there is no other community or private membership recreation outdoor facility in the entirety of the zoning district. So this only applies, this only affects the golf course property. So it is a spot zoning in that it affects that property and not the others in the special development district.
And relative to other properties surrounding the golf course, is there anything different in their physical characteristics that would justify disparate treatment in the zoning ordinance?
No, there's nothing that would justify treating the golf course properties differently than the surrounding properties. Their existing condition of developed properties and their pre-development condition, based on my observation of what's out there today, was likely identical to the golf course property as it exists today. The vacant properties are identical to the golf course property. The entire area, the golf course, and the surrounding properties are all similar topography, open fields, woodlands, rolling hills. There's nothing in my mind that distinguishes that property from any of the properties surrounding it.
Address the next conclusion, number 5 in your report regarding the improper delegation of approval authority. The topic the objection I raised is essentially trying to do zoning by public referendum, land approval by public referendum.
Sure. So we've talked about previously the requirement or the mechanism to move down the list from more to less restrictive land use or land use category. The only recourse a property owner has to do that, to avail themselves to one of the other 57 potential uses, is to receive approval from surrounding property owners. That is not contemplated anywhere in the municipality's planning code. In fact, specifically the municipality's planning code vests the authority with the elected officials to make zoning decisions, and they don't have the ability to delegate that to random property owners who happen to have bought property next to the affected tract.
Next, would you go to your 6th discussion and conclusion in your report?
So the overall text amendment to section 913 of the Special Development District is contrary to good planning principles as well as the requirements of the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code. The Municipalities Planning Code outlines and requires specific processes and procedures for the consideration of text amendments, for the consideration of map amendments, for the adoption of comprehensive plan, for the adoption of a zoning ordinance. All of those processes and procedures should be, must be, followed as required by the Municipalities Planning Code. It's also good planning practice to follow them and go above and beyond to encourage property owner engagement, public engagement in the process. This process that's proposed in the amendment to Section 913 circumvents the good planning principle of transparency, engagement, property owner involvement, and instead changes the zoning of a property by affecting a text amendment. In fact, in the proposed amendment, the preamble includes a statement that the Planning Commission, when they reviewed this amendment, had no recommendations. So the Planning Commission is charged by the community to review proposed land use decisions and make recommendations for, against, or otherwise to elected officials, had no comment. So there's no history here, there's nothing recorded, the prior testimony from the prior hearings doesn't indicate anything that would say to me that this amendment, this land use amendment, went through the required process of the municipalized planning code or a good planning process to get to this point before it could be considered for adoption.
Is there anything in the record that you reviewed or the proposed amendment that indicates the adoption of this proposed ordinance is in the best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the
I would ask again that you speak into the microphone so all our residents can hear you.
Is there anything in the record that you reviewed or in the proposed amendment that you reviewed that would indicate that the adoption of this proposed ordinance, that there's any evidence that's in the best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the community?
No, there's nothing in the prior record, there's nothing in the ordinance, there's no evidence that I've seen that would justify this zoning scheme that rezones this particular piece of property.
Would you look at page 10 of your report, and I've asked you to go through a summary of the conclusions that you've testified about?
Sure, overall, I have found that based on my review of the ordinance and based on my review of the related documents that this ordinance amendment should not be adopted. It does not comport with the requirements of the municipality's planning code. It does not follow good practice, planning practice. It does effectuate a rezoning of property improperly. Re-effectuates a rezoning of property improperly because it is a text amendment and not a map change to the zoning map. It also is treating a particular area, contiguous area, tract of property or properties differently than surrounding properties. So it's severely restricting the use of this one particular tract of land from the ability to develop as 58 potential uses versus now one. So that's a severe restriction that is targeted and affects only that golf course property and not the surrounding properties that are similarly situated. So it is spot zoning, it is a rezoning, and it's an improper use of municipality's planning code process for consideration and adoption of a zoning amendment.
So would you describe it
As a rezoning of the property disguised as a text amendment to the zoning ordinance?
Yes, it is a rezoning of the property, but it is a text amendment to the zoning ordinance rather than a proper zoning map amendment.
Are you certain, within a reasonable degree of professional certainty as to the conclusions and matters you testified about?
Yes.
I don't have anything further for Mr. Tran. I do have one question. I want to call Mr. Swisher back for briefly. It's just one question.